In 30 years on the bench, I signed guardianship orders for hundreds of people. I signed them because the law required it, and because someone had filed a petition claiming a person could no longer manage their own life. I believed, most of the time, that I was protecting someone. I know now that in some of those cases, I was not. I was handing one family member legal control over another family member who did not need it, did not want it, and had no idea what was about to happen to them. My name is Thomas Warren. I spent 30 years as a family and probate court judge. I presided over more than 2,000 cases involving wills, estates, guardianship, and financial disputes between family members. I retired at 62, not because I was required to, but because I had seen enough. 30 years of watching families use the legal system against each other, and I decided I could do more from outside the courtroom than I ever could from inside it. What I want to talk about today is the case that changed how I think about guardianship proceedings. It is not the worst case I saw, but it is the one that taught me the most about how a tool designed to protect people can be used as a weapon against them. Before I describe Harold's case specifically, I want to say something about what guardianship proceedings look like from the inside of a courtroom. Most people never see one. They hear the word guardianship and they think of something protective, something designed for people who genuinely cannot manage. And that is what it is designed for. A person with advanced dementia who cannot recognize family members, who cannot make medical decisions, who is in danger of being exploited because they no longer understand what is happening around them. That is who this process was built to help. What the process was not built to handle is a family member who disagrees with an elderly parent's choices, a son who does not approve of his father's new relationship, a daughter who believes a parent is spending money in ways she would not choose, an adult child who simply wants to know that the inheritance will be there when the time comes. None of those are legal grounds for guardianship, but all of them have been the real motivation behind petitions I have seen filed. And because the threshold to file is low, the process begins regardless of the underlying motive. Harold Vinson was 77 years old when his son filed the petition. He had spent his life as a carpenter in Ohio, built his own house in 1974, raised 2 children, and retired with a paid-off home and savings of around $240,000. His wife had died 3 years earlier. He was adjusting to living alone, the way people do at that age. Slowly, not always easily, but managing. His neighbors knew him. His doctor knew him. The woman at the hardware store where he had shopped for 40 years knew him by name. He was a man who was present in his community and present in his own life. His son, Brian, was 45. I want to be precise about what I am not saying here. I am not saying Brian was a bad person. I am not saying his concern for his father was entirely manufactured. People can be genuinely worried about an aging parent and simultaneously motivated by things they have not examined honestly in themselves. The disapproval of Patricia, the anxiety about what his father might do with his savings, the grief over his mother that had not been fully processed and that found an object in a woman his father seemed to be replacing her with. None of that makes Brian villainous. It makes him human. What makes it legally actionable is that he chose to translate those feelings into a court filing against his father rather than a conversation with him. And once he made that choice, Harold's life was no longer entirely his own for 14 months. His son Brian was 45. He lived 2 states away, worked in sales, and had not visited his father more than twice a year for most of Harold's retirement. When Harold's wife died, Brian called more often for a while, then less. When Harold began spending time with a woman named Patricia, a widow in her 60s who lived 4 blocks away, Brian called the county probate court. He filed a petition for guardianship, claiming his father had dementia and was being financially exploited by a predatory woman who had inserted herself into his life after his mother's death. The petition was filed in March. By April, Harold had a court-appointed evaluator reviewing his finances. By May, there was a hearing scheduled. Harold did not know about the petition until a process server delivered papers to his house on a Tuesday morning. He called his daughter, who was also blindsided. He did not have an attorney. He did not know he needed one. The petition said he lacked capacity to manage his own affairs. He read it standing in his kitchen and could not understand how his son had described him that way. I want to stop here and explain what happens when a guardianship petition is filed, because most people do not understand the process until they are inside it. A petitioner, in this case a family member, files a claim with the probate court stating that an adult is incapacitated. The court appoints a guardian ad litem to investigate and evaluate the alleged incapacitated person. There is a hearing. The alleged incapacitated person must demonstrate at that hearing that they are capable of managing their own life and finances. That reversal of burden is the thing that catches people. In most legal proceedings, you are presumed capable until proven otherwise. In a guardianship proceeding, once the petition is filed, you are in a position of having to prove that you are competent. The petition itself creates a presumption that something is wrong. And if you cannot afford an attorney or do not know to hire one, you are defending yourself against someone who has had months to build a case. Harold showed up to the first hearing without a lawyer. Brian came with an attorney and a stack of documents. Bank statements showing a withdrawal of $15,000 that Harold had given to Patricia for a medical expense she had described as an emergency. A letter from a doctor in Bryan City who had never examined Harold, but had reviewed a summary of symptoms Brian had described to him, and photographs taken from Harold's social media account showing Harold and Patricia at a casino in West Virginia. The doctor's letter described what Brian had told him: confusion, memory lapses, giving money to a romantic partner, poor financial judgment. The doctor had never met Harold. He had listened to Brian on the phone for 20 minutes and written a paragraph that used the word dementia twice. I want to describe the atmosphere in that courtroom during Harold's testimony because the atmosphere matters. Brian's attorney was polished, prepared, and experienced in these proceedings. He had exhibits numbered and tabbed. He had a timeline printed on a board. He had a theory of the case, and he presented it methodically. Harold had no attorney. He had his daughter sitting in the gallery, who was not permitted to speak for him. He had himself. When Harold spoke, he spoke slowly. He paused between sentences the way older people sometimes do, choosing words with care. Brian's attorney noted those pauses in a way that suggested they were evidence of cognitive difficulty. They were not. They were the pauses of a man who understood that what he said in that room had consequences and who wanted to get it right. I have presided over thousands of hours of testimony. I know the difference between confusion and deliberateness. Harold Vinson was deliberate. Harold stood up in my courtroom and said that he had given Patricia the money because she had asked and he had wanted to help. He said he went to the casino once a month because he and his wife had done it together for 20 years, and it was the one thing that still felt like her. He said his memory was not what it used to be, but he knew who he was and what he owned and what he wanted to do with the rest of his life. He was clear. He was coherent. He was frightened. I can still hear him saying, "I am not incompetent. I just got old." If you are watching this and someone in your family has received guardianship papers, or if you suspect someone close to you is considering filing, please subscribe to this channel before you continue watching. What I am about to explain about how these proceedings work and how to protect yourself or someone you love is information that needs to reach people before the papers arrive, not after. Subscribe now and share this with anyone over 65 who owns property, has savings, or has recently entered a new relationship after the death of a spouse. They need to know what I am about to say. I want to say something about guardian ad litems before I describe what she found, because most people do not know this role exists until they are inside a proceeding. A guardian ad litem is a court-appointed investigator. In a guardianship case, their job is to independently assess whether the alleged incapacitated person actually lacks capacity. They are not the petitioner's advocate. They are not the respondent's advocate. They are the court's eyes. The quality of that investigation varies enormously, depending on the individual and the resources available. In some jurisdictions, guardian ad litems are overwhelmed with caseloads and cannot spend adequate time on each case. In others, they are thorough professionals who do exactly what the role requires. Harold was fortunate. The person assigned to his case took it seriously. Not everyone is that fortunate. And in the cases where the investigation is thin, the petition carries more weight than it deserves, simply because there is nothing robust to counter it. The guardian ad litem assigned to Harold's case was a competent professional. She visited Harold at home 3 times. She spoke to his doctor, who had been his physician for 11 years and had no concerns about Harold's cognition. She spoke to his neighbors and to the woman at the hardware store. She spoke to Patricia, who produced records showing that the $15,000 had been used to pay for a surgery Patricia had undergone, that Harold had offered it before she asked, and that she had since repaid $3,000 and was on a payment plan for the remainder. The guardian ad litem's report was clear. Harold Vinson was an elderly man with mild age-related memory concerns that did not rise to the level of incapacity. He was capable of managing his finances. He was capable of making decisions about his relationships and his daily life. She recommended that the petition be denied. I want to explain why those continuances mattered, beyond the time they added. Every month that case remained open, Harold lived under a cloud. His neighbors knew there was a court case involving him because the court filing was public record. People in small communities talk. Harold told the guardian ad litem that he had run into an acquaintance at the grocery store who had asked him, with genuine concern, whether he was all right. Harold said he did not know how to answer that question. He said, "I am fine, but the court does not know that yet." The temporary financial restrictions also had a practical cost. Harold had arranged to sell a strip of land adjacent to his property to a neighbor who wanted to expand a fence line. It was a simple transaction, $3,200, something Harold had been planning for over a year. He could not complete it while the restrictions were in place. The neighbor eventually withdrew the offer because he had found another solution. It was a small loss, but it was Harold's to make, and it was taken from him without him having done anything to deserve it. Brian's attorney requested a continuance, then another. The case stretched across 8 months. During those 8 months, Harold could not access a portion of his savings because the court had placed a temporary restriction pending resolution. He could not sell a piece of property adjacent to his house that he had been planning to sell for 2 years. He could not make certain financial decisions without court approval because the temporary measures were in place. He described it to me later as feeling like someone had reached into his life and put a lock on everything, and he could not find the key, and nobody would explain where the key was. At the final hearing, Brian's attorney introduced one new piece of evidence: a text message exchange between Harold and Patricia, in which Harold had written that he was thinking about changing his will to include her. Brian argued this was proof of financial exploitation, that a vulnerable elderly man was being manipulated by a woman who had targeted him for inheritance. I looked at that exchange. I read it 3 times. Harold had written, in a text message to a woman he had been spending time with for over a year, "I have been thinking that when I go, I would like to leave you something. You have made the last year easier. I hope you know that." It was not a contract. It was not a legal document. It was a man telling someone he cared about that she mattered to him. I want to be precise about what those findings on the record meant, because they mattered beyond Harold's case. When a judge makes findings on the record in a guardianship proceeding, those findings become part of the official documentation of the case. They can be cited in any future proceeding involving the same person. What I wrote in Harold's case was explicit. Harold Vinson is a competent adult. His financial decisions, while not those his son would have made, are his own to make. His personal relationships are his own to choose. No evidence presented in these proceedings rises to the legal standard of incapacity. I wrote that because I knew Brian might try again. People who pursue guardianship petitions against competent parents sometimes file a second time after a denial, citing new developments. I wanted the record to be clear enough that any judge who saw a second petition would have an immediate foundation for understanding what the first one had been about. I do not know whether Brian ever considered refiling. Harold told me he did not hear from his son for nearly 2 years after the appeal was denied. I denied the petition. I denied it completely, with findings on the record that Harold Vinson was a competent adult who had the right to make his own financial and personal decisions, including decisions about his estate and his relationships. I noted in my findings that the medical letter submitted by the petitioner had been authored by a physician who had never examined the subject, and that this type of evidence would be given no weight in these proceedings. Brian appealed. The appeal was denied 6 months later. Harold spent 14 months total in this process. I want to tell you what happened to Harold during those 14 months, because the legal outcome is not the whole story. He lost weight. His doctor noted a decline in his overall health that she attributed, in her notes, to elevated stress. He stopped going to the hardware store as often. Patricia stayed, but their relationship was strained by the scrutiny and by the fact that her finances had been examined in open court. Harold told me, when I saw him briefly after the appeal was decided, that he felt like a stranger in his own house during that time, like someone was always watching to see if he would make a mistake. Before I give you the 3 things I want you to remember, I want to say something about the cost of these cases that the legal outcome does not capture. Harold won. The petition was denied. The appeal was denied. By every measure the system uses to evaluate success, Harold's case had a good result. And yet what was taken from him during those 14 months cannot be returned. The feeling of being watched in his own house, the conversation at the grocery store, the land sale that did not happen, the months when Patricia and he were under scrutiny and their relationship felt like evidence rather than a life, the weight loss, the doctor's notes about stress, the phone calls Harold had to make to explain to people he trusted what was happening. None of that is in the court record. None of that has a legal remedy. I have seen people win guardianship cases and never fully recover the version of themselves that existed before the petition was filed. That is the thing about these proceedings that the system does not account for. The damage is not only in losing. The damage is also in having to fight. Here is what I want you to take from this case. First, a guardianship petition can be filed by anyone who claims to be concerned. The threshold to file is low. What is required to win is higher, but the process itself is damaging regardless of outcome. If you have a family member who you believe might file such a petition, or who has expressed concern about your finances or relationships in a way that feels controlling, speak to an elder law attorney now, not when the papers arrive. Now. An attorney can help you document your competency, organize your finances clearly, and establish a legal record that makes a petition much harder to pursue. Second, a medical letter from a doctor who has never examined you is not a diagnosis. It is an opinion based on secondhand information. In the jurisdiction where I presided, such letters were given minimal weight when contested by a physician who had actually treated the patient. Know your doctor. Keep regular appointments. Make sure the person who knows your medical history is the person on record, not a physician your family member found and briefed by phone. Third, if you are in a new relationship after the death of a spouse, and your adult children have expressed disapproval, document everything. Keep records of your financial decisions and the reasons behind them. Keep records of your conversations. This is not because you owe your children an accounting of your life. It is because, if a petition is ever filed, that documentation becomes the evidence that demonstrates you were acting with full awareness and intention, not confusion. Harold Vinson was not the only person who came through my courtroom in a case like this. In 30 years, I saw versions of this pattern more times than I can count. The details change. Sometimes it is a daughter, not a son. Sometimes the new relationship is a caregiver rather than a romantic partner. Sometimes the alleged exploitation is a gift to a church, or a donation to a cause the children found excessive, or a decision to spend retirement savings on travel rather than preserving them for inheritance. What stays the same is the underlying mechanism. An adult child who believes they know better than their parent how that parent should live the final chapter of their life, and who has discovered that the legal system provides a tool that can enforce that belief. The tool was designed for something else, but it is available, and the threshold to use it is lower than most people realize. Harold Vinson was not the only person who came through my courtroom in a case like this. He was one of many. What made his case different was that he had the resources, eventually, to retain an attorney, and that the guardian ad litem assigned was thorough and honest. Many people do not have those things. Many people sit across from a judge who has a stack of cases and a petitioner with an organized file, and they have no one to speak for them. Those are the cases that haunt me. I spent 30 years trying to get things right from behind a bench. I did not always succeed. What I can do now is tell you what I know before you need it, instead of after. Because after, in these cases, is often too late. If you know someone who is widowed, over 70, has savings, and has recently started a new relationship, share this with them. Not as a warning that they are vulnerable, as information that they deserve to have. Thank you for watching until the end. I will be here every week.